Minnesota Wild trade reports keep on coming out just as the Minnesota Wild wanted them to. We have so many more updates regarding Marco Rossi, including a big name who is touted to be a top trade target in this year's offseason, as well as a few other interesting options that the Minnesota Wild are supposed to be doing with Marco Rossi. We're going to be breaking it all down here in this video. Very quickly before we jump into it, be sure to hit the sub button if you haven't already. We noticed that just over 82% of you guys watching right now are not subscribed to the channel. We know you want all of your Minnesota Wild news. We're going to have it right here for you, so be sure to hit the sub button if you haven't already. We have a lot of stuff coming, including the decision on Marco Rossi. Now, we do have many more updates, and I feel like this is kind of just coming out more and more every day. We start to see something new, and we do have some more here today. Starting off here with a report from Daily Faceoff, and I wanted to pull up the quote that they had regarding the top target in JJ Peterka. Now, he is right at least at this point right now, and probably will be for the remainder of the offseason until he gets traded, if he does, of course. JJ Peterka is their top trade target here, the left winger out of Buffalo. 23 years old, 68 points in 77 games, and similar to Marco Rossi, is a pending RFA. Now, I want to pull up the quote that Daily Faceoff had here, going over the whole idea. They said there may be no better available period on the trade market this summer, let alone one of Peterka at age 23. Already a top-line producer, embattled Sabres GM Kevin Adams has said publicly that he has no design of trading Peterka. But the sense is a change of scenery is in order. Multiple teams put together significant offers for Peterka at the deadline, leading up to the March deadline, but Buffalo was not biting then. They may have less of a choice now, with the potential offer sheet waiting on the other end of July 1st. Now, this was the description they gave for this trade of JJ Peterka being the number one trade target, and who better to get rid of a player if you were to get a guy like JJ Peterka than Marco Rossi. It kind of goes to show that, a 23-year-old forward who is very, very talented, an RFA, some of the Buffalo Sabres, are not really wanting to get rid of, but seems like they need a change of scenery. Very reminiscent of the situation the Minnesota Wild are in right now for Marco Rossi. And we've spoken about JJ Peterka here on the channel before. Very little, and not kind of delving into the details here that we have now with this report that Daily Faceoff are putting them at number one on this year's trade target, with Marco Rossi being number 3. But it does seem like one of these trades that really works out well for both sides. And if we're putting this into detail, you really would have to assume that it would be JJ Peterka and for Marco Rossi, with maybe a few, like a pick swap here, a pick swap there. But for the most part, you're looking at two very, very similar players. And as you've seen there, and I'll kind of delve into the bigger stats here, JJ Peterka, 77 games, 68 points, a better pace than Marco Rossi, also being able to play on the first line, but mainly stayed in the second line here this year for the Sabres. Just over 18 minutes time on ice. Played pretty well defensively this year. 23 years old once again. A bigger guy, which I think is one thing the Wild are looking at in a better scenario than Marco Rossi. When you compare him to Marco Rossi here, Rossi, 5'9", a little bit older than Peterka. They're still 23, but, January to November, birthday style. Marco Rossi, the center. 57% Corsi, which shows a bit of a better defense there, and 60 points in 82 games, around the same time on ice. So when you're comparing these two players by stats, you're getting two very similar stat lines, two very similar play styles. Of course, JJ Peterka, more physical, much more physical compared to a guy like Marco Rossi, who just doesn't use that physicality because he can't. 5'9", definitely would absolutely. We see him getting in the dog areas of the ice, but it's just something that he can't really control. But when you're looking at this type of trade, the Buffalo Sabres have quite a few big players. They're a big team. I think there's no doubting that. The Minnesota Wild, they are not the biggest team. They're more on the smaller side, but would like to be big. And when you're looking for a guy who's bigger like that, JJ Peterka to the Minnesota Wild sounds right. When you're looking for a guy who's a bit more small, a bit more talented, that sounds good for the Buffalo Sabres on their end. A 5'9" center in Marco Rossi. And when we kind of go here, I wanted to pull up the lines for the Buffalo Sabres. Of course, you have Jiri Kulik, who can play the wing as well, playing center there on the second line. Josh Norris, their big acquisition there on the first line, being their first line center. JJ Peterka, a second line left winger here behind Zach Benson. Now, when you're looking for more depth setters, perhaps, when you have a guy like Peyton Krebs, another very young player, when you have a guy like McLeod there on the third line, there's a lot of options that the Buffalo Sabres have to be able to make some spots at center. But when you're looking at a guy like Marco Rossi, he is a guaranteed, if you need to have one center can easily be a 2. There's so many options that would give the Buffalo Sabres here, and a guy like JJ Peterka, who may be out trying to get some more moves there on the wing for the Buffalo Sabres, things really seem to be making sense, at least to me right now, and I want to know what you guys think in the comments below. But one thing that really causes a bit of room for confusion, at least to me right now here, is the contract that for projections for both these players. Now, when you're looking at this is very similar to what we're looking at Marco Rossi, but this is not Marco Rossi's projections here by AFP. This is JJ Peterka's projections. So, if the Minnesota Wild do not feel like they want to give this contract out to a guy who may have not proved it yet, like Marco Rossi, JJ Peterka is the same age, putting up a similar point total and getting, or what is projected to be at least, the same contract as Marco Rossi. So, this must mean to me, if they're planning on trying to do something like this, trying to make this trade happen, that it's not the price they're worried about, it's Marco Rossi's future with this team. And as me and Josh made in last video, the quotes there coming from Bill Guerin, kind of from that tweet, really just kind of shows that, there seems to be uncertainty there regarding his future, his play style with the Minnesota Wild. So I want to know what you guys think, because it's very interesting when we look at it, and of course how Marco Rossi fits in this lineup. We have a guy, Daniil Yurov, who's going to be taking that role next year presumptively, and, kind of takes over Marco Rossi's role. So if they're looking for another winger like JJ Peterka here, it makes a lot of sense to me for the Minnesota Wild. So let me know what you think there in the comments below. But we do have another article kind of going over what the thought process could be behind a Marco Rossi trade and giving them a bit of an option out of the blue. And this is a very interesting one. So be all ears here, because I want to know your thoughts about this as well. Now, this report here is saying, taking that as a given, the optimal move for swap Rossi for a player of different flavor, whom the Wild will use better. And if the defensive depth was much of a liability as the forward depth, that means the team has more potential trade partners in a Rossi deal. If they're going to be picky about when they want to win, they may not have the luxury of doing it by improving specifically at forward. So this article is really pointing at the idea of going out and trading Marco Rossi for a defenseman, and kind of alluding to the fact that the defense on the Wild is not that deep. Now, I completely disagree with that. The Wild defense right now is pretty deep as well, and I kind of want to pull up right here where we currently stand. And Brock Faber, Jared Spurgeon, Jonas Brodin, Jacob Middleton, Zach Bogosian, Zeev Boyum, David Jiricek, John Merrill, Declan Chisholm. Now, we also have so many more younger players as well to think about. Guys like Carson Lambos, guys like David Spacek, a few more names that we can just keep on continuing to name that are being, these other options that are kind of getting pushed out of the way because of how deep this defense is. And then you see how that projection there probably. A recent column in The Athletic mentioned Bowen Byram and Condre Miller as two interesting assets that may fit the description. Both are left-handed defensemen on struggling teams who have a strong second pair result in spite of the challenge presented by their teammates. Now, when you go back, we'll kind of look at here. The highlighted players here are left defensemen: Zeev Boyum, Jacob Middleton, and Jonas Brodin. Now, Brodin, Middleton, getting on the older side of things. Zeev, of course, is going to be the future of this left side. But when you go here, look at Condre Miller and Bowen Byram. These are two younger players that certainly would fit into this. Now, when you wanted to make these trades, or if these are options here for the Minnesota Wild, you would have to go and move either Brodin or Middleton. You can't afford to either sit Middleton or sit Boyum or sit either of those other acquisitions. It really doesn't make sense, but I can understand where things are coming from. The left defense may be a bit weaker than the right-hand side of things, but that really does, to me at least, indicate that either Middleton or Brodin would need to be traded to be able to go and get one of these players. So I think the options are still limited to the forward side of things. I'm not 100% counting out a trade for a defenseman. However, from everything we've seen, from the reports of the Wild looking for a guy like Tyson Forrester and a first of what we saw from the Philadelphia Flyers was their asking price, it really does seem like it's going to be a big forward that will help the team now, but also be on the younger side. And I think that all signs are really pointing towards JJ Peterka in this instance. So let me know what you think about, first of all, JJ Peterka. Second of all, the defensive side of things. Where's your head going when you think of this Marco Rossi trade? And of course, still, it doesn't seem like a Marco Rossi trade is really the smartest decision. However, at this point now, I've kind of accepted the fact that it's going to happen at some point, but we just don't know where, for what, or anything. And that's why I'm kind of on edge here about these types of trades. So let me know what you think in the comments below. I think there's a lot of options, but I want to get your input as well. But that's all I got in this video. If you did enjoy, give it a like, hit the sub button as well. I'm signing out. Thank you for watching. Hope you have a great day. See you later.